Greetings, folks. Welcome to week 5. This week will be a little less theory-oriented and more practice, intervention-oriented, working with a specific population, social work with the poor, case management, criminal justice, and mental health. So it's a bit of a switch from previous weeks, but I think you'll find it really interesting. There's some really interesting learning materials this week, and the objectives are to identify and explain important issues to consider in working with individuals with mental health issues, and secondly, to identify the connection between the criminal justice system and the mental health system. So, very important topics, critically important social problems that I think most, if not all of you, should find interesting and useful. And I think this week will give you a chance to focus on something a little different as you begin to think about the social work practice intervention paper, which I'll discuss momentarily. In terms of the learning resources, you have a chapter from the Poolin text, Practice with Economically Disadvantaged Clients and Communities, an article about using narrative therapy with offenders, some really good chapters from texts by Kia Bentley, and one with Joseph Walsh as well, that I believe are really well written, clear, easy to understand. And then an article looking at evidence-based practice with adults in jails and prisons. And lastly, a chapter about psychopathology, a competency-based treatment model for social workers. So I think all of these should aid you as you begin to think about practice with this particular population, as well as working with mental health, providing case management, and looking at issues of psychopathology. You'll have a video called The New Asylums. It's a set of videos about mental health in the prison system. And then, somewhat unrelated, but a very good video looking at foster care with Molly McGrath Tierney. So that one's inspiring. Regarding the Week 5 discussion, it's this PBS Frontline video, The New Asylums. You'll reflect on the relationship between the prison system and the mental health system, thinking back to theories that you learned in Social Work 501, Human Behavior in the Social Environment. What theory do you feel best explains the problem and why? So you might think about systems theory, for example. That might be a really useful theory to bring to bear in thinking about this particular problem. Obviously, there's any number of theories that might be useful for you as you begin to think about the prisons and mental health. So please give that some thought. Think about what theories really jump out to you in that regard. And then you'll respond to at least one classmate, discuss similarities and differences you see between your post and that of your classmate. Based on the theory and problem your peer described, choose and discuss a potential intervention for a specific component of the issues in these systems, including why you chose this intervention. And the instructions are the same as for most of the posts and responses this semester. And it looks like one of you has gotten a bit of a head start. And I'll jump right to the assignment. I just realized that my The font is rather small, so let me make it a little bit larger and also increase my screen size here, if I can do that. Okay, so this is the social work practice intervention paper due 11:59 next Sunday. This paper will provide you with an opportunity to review the practice intervention and research literature on one intervention approach for a specific problem and population. You will use the same problem/client population as the one that you used in your social work practice theory paper so that you can explore clinical work with that client population more thoroughly. Imagine you're a clinical social worker with that client. Pick one intervention to research and describe how and why that intervention applies to and is useful in working with the client population. So, whereas in the theory paper, the focus was on abstract aspects of the theory, the concepts and the assumptions, here you're going to be able to sink your teeth into intervention, which is, I think, probably what most people, practitioners, know about the intervention piece. Not everyone has a solid foundation in theory, which is why we focused on that theory paper, but here I think you'll feel a little more at home. Most of you, at least, will feel more at home in terms of the actual intervention, one intervention. The paper is set to be 3 to 5 pages in length, using all APA style, including a title page, reference page, APA formatted citations. Please use headings. 3 to 5 pages does not include your title page or reference page. And the text should be organized in a narrative form, not bullet points, using the following headings: your introduction, what you'll cover and why you selected this area. So just a summary of what you're going to talk about and why. Section 2, your problem population. So again, like in the practice theory paper, you'll describe the problem population, and it should be the same as in the practice theory paper, unless I mentioned any revisions or edits. Be sure to include the characteristics of the population that are the focus of the intervention strategy. So here you can use the same. I know that the similarity scores in Turnitin will go up, but for this paper, that's okay. Part 3, you'll review and critique one intervention strategy. So using readings and articles, follow these guidelines for your analysis, identifying the theoretical framework that supports the intervention and any underlying assumptions. So as in your first paper, you're going to identify which theoretical framework or frameworks guide the intervention. So for example, cognitive theory and behavior theory guide CBT. Feminist therapy is guided by social work feminist theory. I may have said that wrong. Feminist therapy is guided by social work feminist theory. Not all are as clear-cut. There should be some theoretical support for the interventions. In addition, what does the theory or theories state about human behavior? This is what we mean by underlying assumptions. So here you're going to focus on the one theory, and then you're going to provide similar kinds of information as you did in the practice theory paper. So just for part A. In part B, you're going to discuss the empirical basis or lack of empirical basis for the intervention. So here the research. Has it been done to show the effectiveness of the intervention in general? Has it been done to show the effectiveness with the population you chose? CBT is a lot of empirical evidence that supports its use with individuals who've been diagnosed with depression, for example. In Part C, you'll discuss the application to the intervention to the client situation, including strengths and limitations. So does the intervention fully address the particular needs of your population? And what are the strengths and limitations of using this intervention with this population? You'll discuss the role of the therapist in the intervention, including use of self issues. What would a therapist utilizing this theory do with the client? What would their role be? What's the level of their self-disclosure? For example, a feminist therapist believes in full self-disclosure. So what are the limits of that? And I've written to you about use of self issues, so you can include some of those pieces in addition to the self-disclosure. So when I mention what the role is, this is not asking you to outline all the steps in the intervention, but the role is more about, is the therapist in a role of teacher, guide, coach, or are they more of a relational, empathetic listener, non-directive kind of listener? So some aspects to think about that will be in the Walsh text. Part E, identify how the approach complements the strengths perspective and collaborative model of intervention, or if it doesn't. In social work, we believe that all systems have strengths and that social workers and clients work collaboratively to bring about change. Sometimes the theories and interventions we use highlight individual strengths and collaborative work, and sometimes they don't. For example, an intervention that makes the social worker the expert would not necessarily be strengths-based. As such, you're asked to evaluate how this intervention complements or does not follow a strengths-based collaborative social work approach. In Part F, you'll discuss how sessions are structured within the approach, including time, sessions, and limits. So here, you're getting a chance to discuss the structure of the sessions as opposed to the role of the worker. What does a basic layout of sessions look like? Is it a brief intervention, or does it require several months or even longer? In Part G, you'll give specific examples of techniques used by the approach. What are the concrete steps of the intervention? Visualization, homework, exercises that require individuals to do a particular thing, etc. So again, this is describing what the worker actually does, specific techniques. And lastly, in Part 3, discuss how practice effectiveness can be evaluated. How would you know that this intervention is helping your clients? What would that look like? Here, you can think about survey instruments used at your agencies, treatment plans, ways in which you're going to measure how you know that your intervention is working, how it's helping your client. And if you don't have survey instruments or a treatment plan or that sort of thing, think through, based on the goals that you've set up with the client, what are some ways that you would see or understand that the client is meeting those goals. In Part 4, your conclusions. So conclusions about the intervention and its application to your population. Here, it's a summary of what you've learned, as well as a critical assessment of the intervention and the research. At least 5 scholarly references in addition to course texts or readings. And you can use sources that were used in your previous paper. Please go through the rubric, although don't use this exclusively. I think it's pretty comprehensive, although make sure to use both the description as well as the rubric. Okay, folks. I believe that's all for week 5. This is quite a lengthy video, so I'm going to stop here. Have a great week, and please reach out to me if you have any questions or concerns. Take care.